Let's start with something you need to hear tonight. You were never lazy, and you were never weak. Every single time you tried to break a habit using pure grit and lost, that wasn't proof of a character flaw. It was proof that you picked a tool that was never designed to finish the job. You picked willpower, and willpower behaves less like a superpower and more like a cup. It fills up when you rest, and every decision you make all day quietly pours a little out. By late afternoon, after emails, traffic, arguments, deadlines, and 100 tiny choices, that cup is nearly dry. And that is the exact moment the old habit chooses to knock on the door. Not at 7 in the morning when you're sharp. At 9 at night, when you have nothing left to defend yourself with. So of course the pattern keeps repeating. You are not fighting the habit on equal terms. You are fighting it at the 1 hour of the day when you are guaranteed to lose. A habit, unlike you, does not get tired. It doesn't need sleep. It doesn't need a good breakfast. It doesn't need motivation. It simply waits. It can wait for months. It only needs one evening when your cup runs dry, and it walks right back in like it never left. Once you really absorb that, something shifts. This was never a fair fight, and it was never supposed to be won by trying harder. You cannot out-tough something that never gets tired. What you can do is stop relying on a resource that runs out every single day and instead learn how the habit itself is built. Because once you understand the machinery, you don't have to overpower it. You only have to redesign it. Every habit, without exception, is built from the same 3 moving parts. A cue that starts it, an action that carries it out, and a payoff that keeps it alive. Something happens, you respond in a familiar way, and you get something out of that response. And that payoff is the entire reason the behavior keeps repeating itself, week after week, year after year. Here is the part almost nobody stops to notice. You are rarely addicted to the action itself. Nobody is truly in love with scrolling a phone, or the snack, or the extra hour lost in front of a screen. What you're actually chasing is what that action hands you afterward. A bit of relief, a bit of comfort, a break from a feeling you didn't want to sit with. The action is only the delivery truck. The payoff is the cargo. And this is exactly why pure willpower fails so often. It tries to block the delivery truck while leaving the cue untouched and the craving for the cargo completely unresolved. You can stand in that road for a while. Eventually the traffic wins because it never stops arriving. So instead of standing in the road, let's actually study it, starting with the cue, because that's the piece almost everyone skips. A cue is whatever quietly flips the switch. Most of the time it falls into one of 5 buckets. A certain time of day, a certain place, a certain emotional state, certain people, or whatever action happened right before. Here's the tricky part. Once a habit is old enough, the cue stops registering consciously at all. You don't think, it's 4 o'clock. This is when I always want something sweet. You just find yourself already standing at the fridge with no memory of walking there. The cue fired, the craving rose, your body moved, and your conscious mind wasn't even called into the room. That's what makes cues so hard to fight. You cannot change what you refuse to look at. So the very first job, before you try to change anything, is to become an honest observer of your own patterns. Catch the habit mid-action a few times and simply ask, where was I? What time was it? Who was around? What was I feeling right before this started? That single act of noticing is worth more than a month of gritted teeth, because a habit performed unconsciously has all the power in the world, and a habit dragged into daylight starts losing its grip the moment you can name it out loud. Once you can actually name your cue, a door opens that willpower never gave you access to. You can sometimes remove the cue completely, not resist it, remove it, so the whole chain never even starts firing. Say your habit is reaching for something unhealthy every night in one particular chair. And once you watch yourself honestly, you realize it was never really about hunger. It was the chair, the hour, and the fact that the item was always sitting within arm's reach on the side table. So you stop keeping it in that spot. You don't fight the craving at 9 p.m. You make the decision on a calm Saturday afternoon, when you're clear-headed and strong, and by the time evening rolls around, there's simply nothing there to trigger the chain in the first place. That's not a more disciplined person. That's a smarter setup. One person fights the same private battle every single night for the rest of their life. The other person made one decision, one time in a grocery store, and never has to fight that particular battle again. But plenty of cues can't be deleted. You can't delete stress. You can't delete a hard emotion. You can't delete the people you love or the passing of time. And this is where the real skill lives. Instead of removing the cue, you keep the cue, you keep the payoff, and you quietly swap out only the action in the middle. Think about what the habit is actually handing you. Nobody stays up too late because they cherish the lost hours. They do it because it hands them a pause, a break from tension. Nobody wastes an afternoon because they love wasting time. They do it because it hands them an escape from boredom, or loneliness, or pressure. Once you know what payoff you're really chasing, the question changes completely. It stops being, how do I resist this, and becomes, what else could hand me that same payoff? Find a different action that delivers the identical reward when that same old cue fires, and you're not fighting anything. You're simply redirecting the current down a different channel toward the same destination. Stress still shows up. The need for relief still shows up. But this time, instead of the old response, you take a short walk, you step outside for 2 minutes, you call someone, you do a handful of slow breaths. If that new action genuinely delivers the relief the old one used to deliver, repetition does the rest. And over time, the craving quietly starts pointing toward the new path instead of the old one. Now, this doesn't happen instantly, and I want to be honest about that. The first few times you insert a new response, it will feel clumsy and unsatisfying because your body was bracing for the old one, and this one doesn't match the memory. But if the payoff is genuinely there, the discomfort fades and the new groove strengthens. This only works, though, if you diagnose the real payoff correctly. And that's where people quietly sabotage themselves. If your afternoon snacking isn't really about hunger, but about boredom needing some stimulation, then a glass of water will never satisfy it, because water doesn't relieve boredom. You'll try it for a day, feel unsatisfied, slide right back to the old habit, and wrongly conclude that the whole approach doesn't work. It wasn't the approach that failed, it was the diagnosis. Match the payoff correctly and the new routine holds. Guess wrong and it collapses every single time. This is exactly why the observation step matters so much. You cannot substitute a reward you never bothered to identify. Now let's talk about the space you actually operate in every day, because this is the piece that makes willpower nearly unnecessary once you get it right. Here's a principle worth carrying for life. You don't rise to the size of your goals, you sink to the level of whatever surrounds you. Whatever is closest and easiest is what you'll reach for. Again and again, regardless of how sincere this morning's intentions were. So if the thing you're trying to quit is sitting in arm's reach, you've quite quietly made failure the path of least resistance. And every human being, without exception, drifts toward the path of least resistance. That isn't weakness. That's just how we're wired. So the actual work becomes very practical. Put friction between yourself and the old behavior, and remove friction from the new one. If it's food, don't keep it in the house. Make indulging require an actual trip to a store, because that small delay is often enough for your rational mind to catch up with the impulsive one. And on the other side, make the good choice the obvious, easy one. Leave the book open where you'll see it. Lay out the workout clothes the night before. Keep water visible and the sugary drink out of sight. Every bit of friction you remove from the good behavior, and every bit you add to the old one, is willpower you never have to spend in the first place. This is the real secret behind people who look impressively disciplined. Follow them home, and you'll usually find they aren't resisting much of anything. They simply built a life where the temptation was never sitting there to be resisted. They didn't win a nightly battle. They made sure the battle never had to happen. There will still be moments the old cue fires anyway, and you're standing right in the middle of it. This is where a short pause becomes your best tool. A craving is not a permanent state. It's closer to a wave. It builds, it peaks, and then, whether you act on it or not, it falls. If you can insert even a small delay between the cue and the old action, the wave very often crests and breaks before you ever give in. So when the urge shows up, Don't declare war on it. That only feeds it. Just postpone it. Tell yourself you can still have it, just not for 10 minutes. There's no rebellion to trigger because you never said no. You only said not yet. And in those 10 minutes, the intensity that felt unbearable usually fades so much you can barely remember why it felt urgent at all. Every time you ride that wave out instead of obeying it instantly, you teach your own mind something important. A craving is a feeling, not a command, and you're allowed to feel it without following it. I also want to prepare you honestly for the moments that test everything you're building, because they are coming, and if you don't expect them, they can undo weeks of good work in a single evening. The first is ordinary stress. Under real pressure, your brain reaches for whatever path is most worn, and the old habit's groove was carved over years, while your new response is still shallow and new. So when a hard week hits, gravity naturally pulls toward the old comfort. The fix is to decide in advance, while you're calm, exactly what you'll do instead when that pressure eventually arrives. Because if you wait until you're inside the storm to decide, the storm makes the decision for you. The second dangerous moment is quiet overconfidence. You go 3 or 4 weeks strong, you start to feel like you've already won, and that feeling of victory whispers a convenient excuse for just once. The problem is that just once almost never stays once. It reopens the exact cue you worked to shut down and reminds your mind that this path is still available, and within days you can be right back where you started, wondering how it happened so fast. The truth is, you never delete an old habit completely. You build a stronger, newer path next to it and let the old one grow quiet. One indulgence can clear that old path again in a single evening. So the moment you feel most confident is exactly the moment to stay most careful, not less. The third dangerous moment is the single slip that turns into a total collapse. And this one is almost entirely a story your own mind tells you, not the slip itself. You break your pattern once. On its own, that means almost nothing. One slip inside weeks of good choices barely registers. But the mind loves to whisper, well, you've already broken it. Might as well give up the rest of the week and start clean on Monday. That single thought is what turns one small slip into an entire weekend of surrender. So hold on to this rule. Never let it happen twice in a row. One slip is simply being human. 2 in a row is the beginning of a brand new habit. Whatever happens today, the very next opportunity you get, you're back on track. Not next Monday, not the first of the month, the very next chance. Nobody avoids every fall. The people who actually change are simply the ones who refuse to let one bad moment become 2. Underneath everything I've described so far sits something deeper, and it's the piece that decides whether any of this actually lasts. Every action you repeat is a small vote for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. Every time you choose the old behavior, you're quietly confirming an identity. This is simply who I am. This is what I do. And every repetition makes that identity feel more true and harder to shake, which is exactly why habits feel so much bigger than simple behavior. This is also why saying, I'm trying to cut back, rarely works as well as you'd hope, because the sentence itself confesses an identity that's still fighting to hold on. But someone who quietly starts thinking, that's just not who I am anymore, has changed the ground they're standing on. There's nothing left to resist, because the old behavior no longer belongs to their story. You don't get to declare a brand new identity overnight and expect it to stick on its own, though. Identity gets built exactly the way a habit gets built, one small repeated choice at a time. Every time you choose the new response over the old one, you cast one more vote for the person you're becoming, and enough votes over enough time eventually settle the matter. So don't dismiss the small wins as meaningless. One short walk instead of the old response looks tiny in the moment, but it's a small piece of evidence entered into the record, quietly proving that you are becoming someone who handles pressure differently now. Let's bring the whole picture together so you leave with a working system, not a pile of scattered ideas. A habit is a simple 3-part loop, a cue, an action, and a payoff. You find the cue by observing yourself honestly, and wherever you can, you remove it so the loop never even starts. Wherever you can't remove it, you identify the true payoff underneath. and design a new action that delivers that same payoff when the old cue fires, so the craving learns a better route to the same destination. You shape your surroundings so the good choice is the easy one, and the old choice requires effort, which quietly removes willpower from most of the fight before it even begins. When a craving does show up anyway, you don't wrestle with it. You simply delay it and let the wave rise and fall on its own. You prepare in advance for ordinary stress, quiet overconfidence, and the single slip, because expecting them robs them of their power to surprise you. And underneath every part of this, you keep casting small votes for the identity you actually want, until the old behavior simply stops fitting who you've become. Notice what's missing from that whole picture. There's no white knuckling, no daily war you have to re-win for the rest of your life, no cup you're forced to drain down to nothing every single evening while the old habit waits patiently for its opening. None of this asked you to be stronger than the habit. It asked you to be more thoughtful than the habit, and that you can always manage, because a habit, for all its patience, isn't intelligent. It's a simple loop, and any simple loop that can be understood can also be rebuilt. So here's what I'd ask you to actually do starting tonight. Choose one habit, just one, not everything at once, because trying to overhaul your entire life in a week is its own quiet way of failing. Spend a few days simply watching that one pattern before you touch it. Learn its cue. Learn what it's really handing you. Get to know the machine before you try to take it apart. Then begin calmly to rearrange it. Remove what can be removed, replace what can be replaced, add friction to the old path, strip friction from the new one, and decide now, while you're calm, how you'll respond the next time real pressure shows up. Every small right choice from here on is one more vote for the person you've already decided to become. You were never broken, and you were never short on character. You were simply using a tool that was never built for a fight that never sleeps. Set that tool down. You don't need it the way you thought you did. This was never a test of how strong you are. It was always a design problem waiting for your attention, and now you actually know where to start.